The dragon adopted a human like a stray cat. Xyrathis had lived for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be surprised. And she had seen the birth of stars and the death of entire civilizations, watched empires rise and crumble into dust across 1,000 worlds. Yet nothing in all her ancient memory had prepared her for what she found drifting through the wreckage of a destroyed colony ship. The debris fields stretched across a vast section of space, twisted metal and shattered dreams floating in the endless dark, and Xyrathis moved through it like a shadow, her massive form blending with the void itself. For she was no ordinary creature, but a cosmic dragon, a being of such immense power that lesser species had built religions around her kind. She had no particular reason to investigate the wreckage, as such tragedies were common enough in the galaxy. Young species venturing too far, too fast, and meeting the consequences of their ambition. Something caught her attention. A faint pulse of energy coming from a tiny escape pod that tumbled slowly through the field of destruction. The pod was barely functional, its systems failing one by one, and through the small viewport, Xyrathis could see a figure inside, motionless but alive. A human female with dark hair matted against her pale face, dried blood on her forehead, and clothes torn from whatever catastrophe had befallen her vessel. Humans, Xyrathis thought with mild disdain, for she knew of this species, though she had never bothered to interact with them, as the galaxy considered them young and unremarkable, barely worth acknowledging. A species that had only recently crawled out of their single planet and begun spreading across the stars like eager children who did not understand the dangers that awaited them. Most elder races viewed humans as one might view insects, brief and insignificant, their entire civilizations rising and falling in what felt like an instant in the grand timeline of the universe. The blink of an eye to beings as ancient as Xyrathis. And she had fully intended to simply note the wreckage and continue on her solitary journey through the cosmos. But the human was still alive, and that fact stirred something in the dragon that she could not quite identify. She extended a tendril of her consciousness toward the pod, scanning the creature inside, and found that the human was injured badly, dehydrated and starving, with perhaps only hours left before her failing body gave out entirely. And still, Xyrathis hesitated, wondering why she should care about the fate of one small mortal when trillions of such creatures existed throughout the galaxy. Perhaps it was boredom, she told herself, for immortality brought with it a weariness that few could understand, and even the most magnificent being could grow tired of endless solitude. Or perhaps it was simple curiosity, a desire to examine one of these strange, soft creatures up close before it expired. Whatever the reason, Xyrathis reached out with her power and drew the escape pod into her embrace, folding it into the pocket dimension that existed within her own essence, a space she had created long ago as a sanctuary where she could rest and contemplate the mysteries of existence. She crafted a small habitat for the human, a bubble of breathable atmosphere with simulated gravity and warmth, much like one might build a terrarium for a small animal found injured on the roadside. And she placed the unconscious creature within it, surrounding her with healing energies that would repair her broken body. Then Xyrathis waited and watched, expecting very little from this fragile being she had rescued on a whim. The human woke 3 days later, and Xyrathis observed from a distance as the creature stirred, groaned, and slowly pushed herself up to a sitting position, her eyes blinking in confusion as she tried to understand where she was and how she had survived. The habitat Xyrathis had created was strange and alien, filled with softly glowing crystals and surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like living things. And any sensible creature would have been terrified to find themselves in such a place after nearly dying in the cold void of space. But when the human looked up and saw Xyrathis watching her, when she beheld a being the size of a starship coiled around her tiny bubble of safety. Scales that shimmered with the light of captured stars, and eyes that held the wisdom of eons. She did not scream. She did not beg for mercy, or collapse into hysterics, as Zarathus had expected. And she did not ask foolish questions, or make demands. But instead, she simply looked at the dragon with tired and determined eyes, her expression one of weary acceptance, mixed with something else. Something that took Zarathus a moment to recognize as dry humor. "If you are going to eat me," the human said, her voice hoarse from days, "without water, could you at least wait until I have had something to drink first?" Zarathus found herself genuinely startled by this response, for in all her long existence she had never encountered a mortal who faced her with such casual defiance. And she had been worshipped and feared by countless species, had watched armies flee at the mere sight of her shadow. Yet this tiny, broken creature was making jokes. "You do not fear me," Zarathus said, her voice resonating through the habitat like distant thunder. "Why?" The human, whose name was Emma Collins, as Zarathus would later learn, shrugged her thin shoulders and winced at the pain the movement caused. "I have spent the last week watching my friends die one by one while our ship fell apart around us," Emma said. "I held my best friend's hand while she took her last breath. And I crawled into that escape pod thinking I would die alone in the dark. So if I am being honest with you, giant space dragon, I have already been more scared than I ever thought possible, and I do not have much fear left to give." She paused and looked around the strange habitat, taking in the glowing crystals and impossible architecture, with an expression of exhausted wonder. "Besides," Emma continued, "if you wanted me dead, you would not have gone to the trouble of building me this very nice terrarium. So either you are planning something complicated, or you are just curious about me, and either way, panicking will not help." Zarathus studied the human for a long moment, this small and fragile creature who had lost everything and yet refused to break. And she felt something she had not experienced in millennia, a spark of genuine interest. "You are perceptive for such a young species," Zarathus said. "And you are very large for a rescue service," Emma replied. "But I am grateful all the same." Zarathus made a sound that might have been laughter, a rumbling that shook the habitat, gently. And in that moment, she made a decision that would change both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. She would keep this odd little creature for a while, just until Emma healed and regained her strength, just until Zarathus grew bored with her strange guest, the same way one might keep a stray animal found shivering in the rain, nursing it back to health before releasing it back into the wild. It was a temporary arrangement, Zarathus told herself, nothing more than a passing amusement to break the monotony of eternal existence. And she had no idea that this small broken human would soon teach her things she had forgotten in all her long years of solitary wandering through the stars. But that understanding would come later, and for now there was only a dragon and a human regarding each other with mutual curiosity, the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. The dragon adopted a human like a stray cat. Days turned into weeks as Emma recovered within the dragon's realm, and Zarathus found herself spending more and more time observing her strange guest, watching through the crystalline walls of the habitat as the human slowly regained her strength and began to explore her new environment. The dragon had expected very little from this fragile creature, assuming that Emma would spend her time in fear and confusion, perhaps crying for her lost companions, or begging to be returned to her own kind. But what Zarathus witnessed instead was something that confused and fascinated her in equal measure. Emma did not simply survive in her captivity. She adapted to it with a speed and creativity that Zarathus had rarely seen in any species, let alone one as young as humanity. On the fourth day of her recovery, Emma began asking questions, not the fearful questions of a prisoner, but the curious questions of a scientist. To know about the crystals that lined her habitat, about the energy that sustained the atmosphere, about the nature of the pocket dimension that contained her. Zarathis answered some of these questions, partly out of boredom, and partly because she was curious to see what the human would do with the information. And Emma listened with an intensity that surprised the ancient dragon, her eyes bright with intelligence as she absorbed knowledge that most beings would have found incomprehensible. By the second week, Emma had discovered something remarkable about the crystalline formations in her habitat, finding that they responded to vibration and particularly to sound. And Zarathis watched in amazement as the human began singing to the crystals, her voice rising and falling in melodies that seemed to resonate with the structures in ways that should not have been possible. The crystals grew under Emma's guidance, shaped by her songs into tools and objects that she needed. Cup for drinking water, a comb for her tangled hair, a small blade for cutting the strange fruit-like growths that Zarathis had provided for food. And each creation was more refined than the last, as Emma learned to control her voice with greater precision. "How did you discover this technique?" Zarathis asked one day, genuinely curious. "I have never seen any being manipulate the resonance crystals in such a manner." Emma looked up from her work and smiled, an expression that Zarathis was beginning to recognize as distinctly human, warm and open despite the circumstances. "I used to sing in a choir back on Earth," Emma said, "and my grandmother always told me that music could change the world. So when I noticed the crystals humming when I talked to myself, I wondered what would happen if I hummed back." "You experimented without knowing the outcome," Zarathis said. "That could have been dangerous." "Everything is dangerous," Emma replied with a shrug. "I could have died on that colony ship, but I did not. And I could have died in that escape pod, but you saved me. So I figure I might as well take some risks while I am still alive to take them." This philosophy baffled Zarathis, for she had spent millennia being cautious and deliberate in all things, weighing every action against potential consequences across centuries. But Emma seemed to operate on an entirely different principle, embracing uncertainty as if it were a friend rather than an enemy. The dragon found herself lingering near the human's habitat more and more often, watching Emma exercise despite her lingering injuries, pushing her body through painful rehabilitation with a stubbornness that bordered on irrational. And sometimes Zarathis would see Emma pause in her exercises, her face twisted with grief, and she knew the human was thinking of the friends she had lost. Emma would cry then, quietly and privately, believing herself unobserved, and the tears would flow down her cheeks as she mourned the people who had died on the colony ship, the friends and colleagues who had shared her dream of exploring the stars. But these moments of grief never lasted long. Every time Emma cried, she would eventually dry her tears, take a deep breath, and return to whatever task she had set for herself, whether it was exercising, or singing to her crystals, or studying the strange environment around her. And this cycle of grief and recovery repeated itself, over and over, each time seeming to leave Emma a little stronger than before. "Why do you try so hard?" Zarathis asked one evening, as Emma completed another round of exercises that left her gasping for breath. "You are alone here, separated from everything you knew, and your people believe you dead. So what drives you to push yourself when you have nothing left?" Emma paused in her exercises and looked up at the dragon, sweat dripping down her face and her muscles trembling with exhaustion. For a moment, Zarathis thought she might break down again, might finally admit that her situation was hopeless. But instead, Emma smiled, that same warm and open expression that Zarathis was beginning to find strangely endearing, and she spoke words that the dragon would remember for a very long time. "I am alive," Emma said simply, "and that is not nothing. That is everything." I do not understand, Xyrathis admitted. How can mere existence be so meaningful to you? Emma sat down on the crystalline floor, catching her breath, and she seemed to be thinking carefully about how to explain something that was obvious to her, but foreign to an immortal being. You have lived for thousands of years, Emma said. Maybe millions, I do not know, but for me, life is short, really short compared to you, and that means every moment matters, every breath is precious, every day is a gift that I might not get again. She looked up at the swirling void beyond her habitat, at the stars that drifted past like glowing snowflakes. My friends are gone, Emma continued, and that hurts more than I can describe. But I survived when I should have died, and that means I have to do something with the time I have been given. I have to make it count, otherwise their deaths would be meaningless, and my survival would be wasted. Xyrathis considered these words for a long time, for she had lived so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to value time, to understand that every moment was fleeting and irreplaceable, and she realized that somewhere in her endless existence she had lost something important, something that this small mortal creature still possessed. You are a strange being, Emma Collins, Xyrathis said finally. And you are a very strange rescue service, Emma replied with a grin. But I think we are both learning something from each other. As the weeks continued to pass, Xyrathis began teaching Emma about the cosmos, sharing knowledge that she had kept to herself for millennia. Stories of ancient civilizations and cosmic phenomena that no human had ever heard. And Emma listened with wonder, and asked questions that sometimes made the dragon see old things in new ways. She had intended to release this human when Emma healed, to deposit her on some safe world and continue her solitary journey, but somehow that intention kept getting pushed further into the future, and Xyrathis found herself making excuses to keep her strange guest a little longer. Just until Emma finished her current project, she told herself. Just until the human learned this next piece of knowledge. Just until Xyrathis grew tired of her company. But the truth was that Xyrathis was not growing tired at all, and instead she was discovering that existence seemed slightly less empty with this bright burning creature beside her, and that realization was both wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. The dragon adopted a human like a stray cat. 3 months had passed since Xyrathis had plucked Emma from the wreckage of her colony ship. And in that time, the ancient dragon had grown more fond of her human companion than she would ever admit aloud. But their peaceful existence was about to be shattered by something that Xyrathis had not faced in 10,000 years. It began as a whisper at the edge of her consciousness, a cold, empty feeling that made her scales tighten and her ancient heart beat faster. And Xyrathis knew immediately what was coming, for she had felt this sensation before, in ages past, and it had nearly destroyed her. The Hollow Ones had found her trail. Emma noticed the change in the dragon before Xyrathis said anything. For over the months, she had learned to read her companion's moods through subtle shifts in the colors that played across those magnificent scales. And she saw the way the dragon's form seemed to tense and coil, preparing for something terrible. Emma asked, setting down the crystal lattice she had been growing. You look scared, and I did not think anything in the universe could scare you. There are things in the cosmos that even I must fear, Xyrathis replied, her voice heavy with ancient dread. The Hollow Ones are coming, entities of pure entropy that exist outside normal reality, and they feed on existence itself, consuming light and life and leaving nothing behind. Emma felt a chill run down her spine, despite the warmth of her habitat, for she had never heard Xyrathis speak of anything with such obvious fear. And if something could frighten an immortal being who had witnessed the birth of stars, then it must be terrible beyond imagining. How did they find you? Emma asked. They are drawn to ancient beings like myself, Xyrathis explained. Our long existence is like a bright light to them, irresistible and delicious, and I encountered them once before, many thousands of years ago, but I was younger then and stronger, and there were fewer of them. The dragon's form shifted and expanded, filling the space around Emma's habitat like a protective shell. And Xyrathis looked down at the human with something that might have been affection mixed with concern. "You must hide in the deepest part of my pocket dimension," Xyrathis said. "There is a place where you will be safe no matter what happens to me, and I will send you there now." "No," Emma said immediately, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. Xyrathis blinked in surprise, for she had expected the human to be grateful for the chance to escape danger, not to refuse it so bluntly. "You do not understand," the dragon said. "The Hollow Ones cannot be reasoned with or frightened away, and this battle may cost me everything, so you must hide where they cannot reach you." "I understand perfectly," Emma replied, standing up and facing the dragon with her chin raised in defiance. "You are going to fight something dangerous, maybe even fight to the death, and you want me to run and hide while you do it alone." "That is the sensible course of action," Xyrathis said. "You are mortal and fragile, and there is nothing you could do against entities that exist outside conventional reality." Emma shook her head, and Xyrathis saw something in the human's eyes that she had seen before. That stubborn determination that refused to accept impossible odds or hopeless situations. "You kept me alive," Emma said, her voice steady and strong. "You found me dying in that escape pod, and you saved me when you had no reason to, and you gave me a home and taught me things that no human has ever learned. So I am not going to hide while you fight alone." "This is not your battle," Xyrathis insisted. "It is now," Emma replied, "because you are my friend, and friends do not abandon each other, not ever, not even when things look hopeless." Xyrathis felt something strange in her ancient heart at those words, a warmth that she had not experienced in millennia, and she wanted to argue further, to force the human to safety. But she could see that Emma would not be moved. "What could you possibly do against the Hollow Ones?" Xyrathis asked, not mockingly, but genuinely curious. "They are beings of pure entropy, consuming everything they touch, and no mortal weapon can harm them." Emma smiled, and there was something fierce and bright in that expression, something that reminded Xyrathis of distant stars burning against the void. "I have been thinking about that," Emma said, "and I have been listening to everything you taught me about the cosmos, about energy and existence and the nature of reality, and I think I have figured something out." She gestured to the crystal lattice she had been growing, the complex structure she had been working on for weeks, and Xyrathis looked at it more closely, seeing for the first time how intricate and purposeful the design was. "The Hollow Ones consume existence," Emma continued. "They feed on the energy of being, on the fundamental fact that something is rather than is not. But humans are different from most species. We are stubborn about existing. We define ourselves by it." "I do not understand," Xyrathis said. "Every human who has ever lived has faced the knowledge that they will die," Emma explained. "We know from the moment we are old enough to understand that our time is limited, that darkness is waiting for us at the end. And instead of giving up, we fight, we love, we create, we refuse to go quietly." She touched the crystal lattice gently, and it hummed in response to her presence. "I have spent 3 months learning to shape these crystals with my voice, with my intent, with my will to exist," Emma said, "and I think I can use that. I think I can broadcast what it means to be human. Feels like to look at oblivion and say no." Xyrathis stared at the human, this small, fragile creature who was proposing to stand against cosmic horrors, armed with nothing but crystals and determination. And she should have laughed at the absurdity of it, should have insisted again that Emma hide and let the dragon handle the threat. But instead she found herself nodding slowly, because there was something in Emma's eyes that made the impossible seem almost reasonable, a light that burned brighter than any star Xyrathis had ever seen. "You may die," the dragon said quietly. "I might have died 100 times already," Emma replied, "but I am still here, and as long as I am here, I am going to fight. The cold presence at the edge of Zirathus's consciousness grew stronger, and she knew that the Hollow Ones would arrive soon, perhaps within hours, and there was no more time for argument or preparation. Very well, Zirathus said, and she could not help but feel something that might have been pride in this stubborn, impossible human. We will face them together. Emma picked up her crystal lattice and held it close, and for a moment she and the dragon simply looked at each other. Two beings from vastly different worlds, who had somehow found a connection that neither had expected. Thank you, Emma said softly, for saving me, for teaching me, for being my friend. Thank me when we survive, Zirathus replied, but there was warmth in her voice despite the words. And together they waited for the storm to arrive. The dragon adopted a human like a stray cat. The Hollow Ones came like a wave of darkness rolling across the stars, their forms shifting and terrible, shapes that the mind refused to comprehend. And where they passed, light itself seemed to die, leaving nothing but empty, cold void in their wake. Zirathus met them at the edge of her domain, her massive form blazing with ancient power, scales burning with the light of captured stars as she prepared for the battle of her long existence. And she struck at the first of the Hollow Ones with claws of pure starfire, ripping through its formless body with all the strength she possessed. The creature screamed, a sound that was not a sound, but an absence of sound, a hole in reality where noise should have been, and it dissolved into nothingness. But even as it died, 3 more took its place, swarming toward the dragon with hungry intent. They were so many, far more than Zirathus had faced in her previous encounter with these entities, and she fought with desperate fury, her breath unleashing waves of cosmic radiation that should have destroyed anything they touched. But the Hollow Ones simply absorbed the energy, feeding on it, growing stronger with each attack. One of them latched onto her tail, and Zirathus felt a horrible draining sensation as it began to consume her existence, pulling at the fabric of her being, and she roared in pain and tore the creature away. But another took its place immediately, and then another. The dragon was surrounded, overwhelmed, and she could feel her strength fading as the Hollow Ones fed on her ancient light. And for the first time in millennia, Zirathus knew true fear. Not fear of death, but fear of ending, of being consumed so completely that even her memory would cease to exist. Inside her pocket dimension, Emma watched the battle through the crystalline walls of her habitat, and she saw her friend being devoured piece by piece by these terrible entities, saw the mighty dragon growing dimmer as her light was stolen away. Emma did not hesitate. She stepped out of her protected habitat and into the open space of the pocket dimension, carrying the crystal lattice she had grown over the past months, the structure that she had poured her heart and soul into creating, and she walked toward the edge of the battle with steady, determined steps. The Hollow Ones did not notice her at first, for she was small and mortal, and barely registered as food compared to the feast they were enjoying. But Emma did not need them to notice her. She only needed them to hear her. She raised the crystal lattice and began to sing. It was not a battle song or a war cry, not a weapon in any conventional sense, but something far more powerful, a declaration of existence, a statement of being that came from the deepest part of her human soul. Emma sang of humanity, of her species' refusal to accept oblivion even in the face of death. Certain death. And she sang of her grandmother, who had lived through war and famine, and still found reasons to smile. She sang of her parents, who had worked their entire lives to give their children a better future. She sang of her friends, who had died on the colony ship, but whose memories still burned bright in her heart. She sang of every human who had ever looked up at the stars, and refused to believe they were insignificant. Every child who had dreamed of impossible things and grown up to make them real. Every person who had faced darkness and chosen to be a light instead. The crystals amplified her voice, her intent, her sheer human willpower, broadcasting it as a frequency that rippled through the fabric of reality itself. And it was not a frequency of destruction, but of creation, of stubborn, persistent existence that refused to be silenced. The Hollow Ones recoiled. They were beings of entropy, of absence, of nothingness, and they fed on existence by draining it away. But what Emma was broadcasting was not something they could consume. It was existence that pushed back, that fought, that declared itself with such fierce determination that the very concept of nothingness seemed to shrink away in response. "We are here," Emma sang, her voice rising and falling with the melody. "We have always been here, and we will not stop being here. Not for you, not for anything, because that is what it means to be human." She poured everything she had into the song, every memory of love and loss, every moment of hope and despair, every ounce of stubborn defiance that had kept her alive when she should have died, and the crystals blazed with light as they carried her message outward. The Hollow Ones writhed and screamed their silent screams, pulling away from Zirathis as the frequency overwhelmed their ability to feed, and for a precious moment they were confused and vulnerable, their formless bodies twisting in agony. Zirathis did not waste the opportunity. The dragon surged forward with renewed strength, her claws and breath tearing through the disoriented Hollow Ones, destroying them one by one as Emma's song continued to weaken their hold on reality, and Zirathis fought with a fury that came not from rage, but from something else, something warmer, a desire to protect the tiny brave creature who had given her this chance. The battle raged for what felt like hours, Emma singing until her throat burned and her voice cracked, Zirathis fighting until her claws were dull and her scales were cracked. But slowly, inevitably, the tide turned. The last of the Hollow Ones dissolved into nothingness, truly destroyed rather than merely scattered, and silence fell across the pocket dimension, a silence that felt clean and pure rather than empty and cold. Zirathis collapsed, her massive form settling onto the fabric of her own reality, like a mountain coming to rest. Light was dim, so much dimmer than it had been before the battle, but it was still there, still burning, still alive. Emma fell to her knees, exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced. Her crystal lattice shattered from the effort of amplifying her song. But she too was still alive, still breathing, still existing. "What are you?" Zirathis whispered, her voice weak but filled with wonder. "What manner of creature looks at cosmic horrors and sings them into submission?" Emma laughed, a tired, broken sound that was somehow still beautiful, and she crawled across the space between them until she could rest against the dragon's dimmed scales. "Just human," she said, her voice raw and rough from singing. "We are all like this, you know, every single one of us. We do not know how to give up. We do not know how to stop fighting. It is not in our nature." Zirathis considered this, thought about the small mortal species she had dismissed as insignificant, unremarkable, and she realized that she had been terribly wrong about them, that beneath their fragile bodies and brief lives burned something extraordinary. "Your species is remarkable," Zirathis said finally. "We have our moments," Emma replied with a tired smile. "Now please tell me you are going to be okay, because I do not think I can handle losing another friend." Zirathis felt warmth spread through her damaged form at those words, at the genuine concern in Emma's voice, and she realized that somewhere along the way, this human had stopped being a curiosity or a pet, and had become something far more important. "I will recover," Zirathis said, "thanks to you." Emma nodded and closed her eyes, leaning against the dragon's scales as exhaustion finally claimed her, and Zirathis curled around the sleeping human protectively, her dim light slowly beginning to brighten again. They had faced the darkness together and won, and nothing would ever be quite the end. Same again. The dragon adopted a human like a stray cat. Word spread through the elder races of the galaxy like wildfire, carried on currents of cosmic energy, and whispered between beings who had existed since before most stars were born. For the news was unprecedented and strange. Zirithus the Eternal had taken a companion. Not a servant or a worshipper or a pet, but a true companion, an equal in spirit, if not in power. And what made the news truly shocking was the nature of this companion, a human, a member of a species so young that many of the elder races had not even bothered to learn their name. Zirithus ignored the whispers and rumors as she and Emma traveled together across the cosmos, visiting wonders that no human had ever seen, binary stars locked in eternal dance, nebulae that painted the void in colors that had no names, the remnants of civilization so ancient that even Zirithus could not remember their origins. Emma absorbed everything with wonder and joy, asking questions that made Zirithus think about things she had taken for granted for millennia. And the dragon found that explaining the universe to someone who saw it with fresh eyes made her appreciate it anew. 6 months after the battle with the Hollow Ones, Zirithus received a summons that she could not ignore. An invitation to the Gathering of Ancients, a conclave of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful beings that occurred only once every 10,000 years. I must attend, Zirithus told Emma. It would cause great offense if I did not. Then attend, Emma said with a shrug. I can wait here until you return. Zirithus hesitated, and Emma noticed the uncertainty in the dragon's expression, something she had learned to read over their months together. What is it? Emma asked. I want you to come with me, Zirithus admitted. The other ancients should see what I have seen, should understand what humans truly are, but I must warn you that they will not be welcoming. Many of them view your species as barely more than animals. Emma considered this for a moment, then smiled that fierce, bright smile that Zirithus had come to love. I have faced cosmic horrors that eat reality, Emma said. I think I can handle some rude old beings with superiority complexes. The Gathering of Ancients took place in a dimension that existed outside normal space and time, a realm constructed specifically for these rare meetings, where beings of immense power could interact without accidentally destroying the fabric of reality. When Zirithus arrived with Emma at her side, the reaction was immediate and hostile. The chamber was vast beyond comprehension, filled with beings that defied description, creatures of living stone and pure energy, entities that existed across multiple dimensions at once, minds so vast that they experienced time itself differently than mortal beings. Kethvoron was the first to speak, a being of living stone who had witnessed the formation of galaxies, and his voice rumbled through the chamber like an earthquake. You bring vermin to our sacred halls, Kethvoron said, his contempt obvious. Have you lost your mind, Zirithus, or simply your dignity? Other ancients murmured in agreement, their attention fixed on the tiny human who stood beside the cosmic dragon, and Emma could feel their disdain pressing against her like a physical weight. The accumulated arrogance of beings who had existed for longer than she could comprehend. But Emma had faced worse than arrogance, had stared into the empty eyes of entropy itself, and refused to look away. And she was not about to be intimidated by creatures who looked down on her simply because her species was young. She stepped forward, away from Zirithus's protective presence, and stood before the assembled ancients with her chin raised and her eyes steady. I am not here to impress you, Emma said, her voice clear and strong in the vast chamber. I am here because Zirithus asked me to come, and she is my friend. So think of me what you will, your opinions do not change what I am. The silence that followed was absolute, so complete that Emma could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the stillness. No young species had ever spoken to the ancients with such casual fearlessness, had ever stood before beings capable of unmaking stars and addressed them as anything less than gods. and the assembled entities did not know how to respond to this tiny creature who refused to be small. "You dare speak to us this way?" Kethvoron demanded, his form shifting with anger. "Do you not understand what we are? What we could do to you?" "I understand perfectly," Emma replied. "You are ancient and powerful, and have seen things I cannot imagine. But I have seen things too. I have watched friends die and held their hands as they took their last breaths, waiting for death that never came. I have stood against creatures that wanted to consume my very existence, and I am still here." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or eye equivalents of beings that could think her out of existence, and she did not flinch. "So yes, I understand what you are," Emma continued, "but I also understand what I am, and that is something you do not seem to grasp. I am human, and humans do not bow to anything, not to time, or death, or cosmic beings who think they are better than us." Zirithis spoke then, her voice resonating through the hall with authority and warmth. "I found this human drifting in the void, broken and alone, and I thought I was saving a creature too small to matter. But instead she showed me something I had forgotten in all my long years." "And what is that?" Kethvoron demanded. The dragon looked at Emma with something that the other ancients had not seen in her eyes for millennia: genuine affection and respect. "She reminded me why existence is worth fighting for," Zirithis said. "Not because we are powerful or eternal, but because we choose to care, even when we do not have to, even when it is easier not to. And these humans, they burn so briefly, but they burn so bright, brighter than any of us." Zirithis moved closer to Emma, her massive form curling protectively around the small human. "I did not adopt her," the dragon continued. "She adopted me, and I am grateful for it, because in her short time with me, she has taught me more about what it means to truly live than I learned in all my millennia of existence." Emma reached up and placed her small hand against the dragon's scales, a gesture of affection between two beings that should never have understood each other. And the warmth of that connection was visible to every ancient in the chamber. Kethvoron watched in silence, and something in his ancient mind shifted, forgotten what it felt like to care about something, to connect with another being in a way that went beyond mere alliance or convenience. The other ancients watched as Zirithis and her human companion left the hall together, and though none of them would admit it aloud, several found themselves wondering if perhaps they had underestimated the young species after all. In the centuries that followed, humanity would come to know Zirithis as their greatest ally among the elder races, a powerful friend who spoke on their behalf and defended them against those who would dismiss them as insignificant. But Emma always laughed when people spoke of her role in forging that alliance, when they called her a hero or a pioneer or a bridge between worlds. "I did not do anything special," she would say, her hair gray now, but her eyes still bright with that fierce human fire. "I just refused to be small, even when everything around me was vast, and that is not special. That is just being human. That is what all of us are, if we choose to be." And somewhere among the stars, an ancient dragon would hear those words and smile, grateful beyond measure for the day she had found a stray human drifting in the void, and decided, on a whim, to bring her home.